Good morning, listeners. You're listening to Uncommon Awareness. I am your host, Dr. Lorraine Hurley, and my website is drhurley.net. That's drhurley.net. Encourage you to go visit the website, read the blog, access archives of shows you may have missed, and sign up for my newsletter. This is one of our twice-a-month roundtable discussions called Evolving the Species, and I don't do this show alone. I have two highly esteemed colleagues, Dr. Dean Lloyd and Am Rosen. And Dean, you can learn all about Dean either by visiting my website or going to Accutone.com, and Am is lifegame.com. If I had to introduce them each and every roundtable we did, we would miss out on some of the communications that our guests have. And our guest today is Leon Joseph Littlebird. His website is littlebirdmusic.com. It's spelled just like it sounds, littlebirdmusic.com. And he's here to discuss his journey of healing cancer without traditional medicine. The talk could be entitled Oxygen and Cancer because that was essentially the therapy that was the turning point for Leon. As far as I know, I don't know his whole story. We're here to learn about it because he's a success story. This, by the way, was, as my understanding, his second time around with cancer. But before we bring Leon on and his story, I want to tell you more about this man, his life, and his accomplishments. Once you hear them, most of you will understand why Leon would take the risk of life. Now, I didn't say risk his life, which in my opinion is what traditional therapy is all about. I said take the risk of life. That's right. If you don't know this life, the choice to live and live in incredibly creative and service-oriented ways to defy spells of death and dying is a risk in our culture. Bucking the status quo and accepting responsibility for all outcomes in our experience is an issue of personal responsibility, one too few people are accepting. I can go on, but this forum, Evolving the Species, is actually an opportunity to create community around whatever we are discussing. So that being said, and before I turn the reins over to my colleague Dean, who really is this forum's host, with me being the co-host, I want to tell you a little bit about Leon. Leon embodies the spirit of Colorado. With roots in both pioneer and native cultures, he understands the magic of the mountains and the Southwest. His great-grandfather was one of the original settlers in Black Hawk, Colorado, and his great-uncle was a classical composer and performer in Silver Plume in Georgetown. This connection to the rich history of Colorado comes through in Leon's music. A prolific songwriter and performer, his unique style tells tales of Colorado and the people of the West. His performances shape compelling stories into a musical show that leaves audiences asking for more. Leon's ancestors also include the indigenous Navajo people of northern Mexico. Leon understands and respects the ancient tradition of Native American flute music. Now, I just want to draw by here. Listeners, by now you're getting that sound and music therapy and the way that this can really help us transform our consciousness and our lives is becoming a much more, a stronger interest for myself. Often the Native American flute was used as a rite of passage for ceremony and for healing. The music has a long tradition of being sacred, romantic, stimulating, and peaceful. So Leon, now, there's so much more. You can read the rest of this autobiography on his website. And Leon is an inspirational speaker and has been invited to preside over events such as marriage ceremonies, restoring the aura and sanctity of sacred and mystical relationships between humans, nature, time, and space. So please go and learn more about him. All right. Besides my tripping over my tongue, let's get the ball rolling. It's going to be a great discussion sharing today, listeners. I'm handing the hosting of, over to my colleague and friend, Dean Lloyd.
Thank you, Lorraine. Wonderful to hear all of you again. We have a story here with Leon that is unique, and I wanted to have him start out by telling what he had, what state of mind he was in when he had it, about his athletic background, and what we'll do is we'll build this story up and give him his current state, and it's a beautiful story. And since you are on top of this, a storyteller, I'm looking forward to hearing it coming from you, Leon. So please tell us what happened and start from the beginning, I guess you could say.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the honor of having this forum to share the experiences that I've had, and certainly with the intent and the spirit of inspiring others, because there's choices that are so viable and so healthy and so incredibly vital for people to make, and I'm living proof of that. I was first diagnosed with leukemia 18 years ago, and at the time the oncologist said I had about 18 months to live, and scared me and everybody in my family. And 18 years ago I had an interest in doing something holistic, but I didn't know enough about it to really and I was so frightened by what the doctors had told me, and everyone around me wouldn't have it any other way, that they wanted me to do traditional chemo. And they gave me what they termed aggressive chemotherapy. They pumped chemo directly into my heart every 30 minutes for 7 days.
Oh, my.
And so it completely trashed my immune system. And in 15 years following the surviving chemo, I got pneumonia 5 times because my immune system was so compromised. And actually, they called it pneumonia, but what it really was, I still think, was the chemo that was pooled up in my body would coagulate in my lungs. And it tasted like chemo. It was orange. It looked like the stuff that they had pumped in me. And it was residue in my body that was left over, and my body was trying to reject it. And so I swore in those 15 years that I would never do chemo again. And when I was re-diagnosed about 4 years ago, and the doctors told me that the leukemia was back full on, my statement to them was, well, your chemo doesn't work, so what do you do now? Right. And they said, we just give it to you every 4 years. I was like, really? You want me to be on chemo the rest of my life? So I wouldn't do it once, much less the rest of my life. So, Lorraine, I heard you use a word that traditional, which I hear used lots of different ways, and you said traditional medicine. I did something really traditional in an ancient way. I went to the healers that I already knew and loved in my community and started talking to them about what was going on with me and what I needed. And the right people came at the right times with the right ideas, and one of which was my friend Dean Lloyd. And Dean and I had actually done music together and been friends before I even really knew exactly what he did in his practice. I had kind of an idea. And I had started doing ozone therapy before Dean and I started discussing it, and he really took me to the next level of healing. But what I have learned in this whole thing is it's so accessible to people to find modalities of healing that cure the soul, mind, body, and heart. And the difference between doing chemo and the difference between doing holistically, in a nutshell, when you do chemo, you're a passive participant in being poisoned. And you just take it. There's nothing you can do. To really do it holistically and to use the other anciently traditional medicine ideas of using modalities of healing, you're an active participant in healing. And it's a transformative experience. It's a chrysalis experience. I used to really rock it as a caterpillar, but I'm really digging being a butterfly a lot more.
This is the kind of thing you can hear in your voice. You're assured. You have the confidence. You've gone through the pain of the chemotherapy. You can mention it, but the depths of what it feels like to go through that experience, I wondered if you could just give me a little bit more insight into what it was feeling like even recently, what you had gone through, what was going through your mind at that time.
And Dean, I'm going to interject one thing because I'll forget if I don't, and that is that Leon has really taught me to choose my words more carefully. Never again will I refer to mainstream medical medicine as traditional. Thank you, Leon.
Yeah, I call it Western.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there are other words. There are
modern.
Words.
Even though I'm a even though I was born in the Rocky Mountains and I'm a Western man, it's Western medicine, right? As opposed to Eastern, I guess. But
yeah, thank you.
Dean, were you asking me to explain what chemo was like?
Well, yeah, it's more when people hear the word chemo, there's a death sentence in that word.
Well, I think the way I like to explain it when I'm talking to people, especially people that I know and love that are now going through cancer of their own, and they've come to me because they see this success story, and they've already been told there's no other way, you have to do chemo, and they're frightened, and so I always just say, well, did you ever cut your finger? They go, yeah. Well, did it heal? Of course. Well, the body knows how to heal. So next time you cut your finger, rub poison in it first, and then see how it heals. And they go, well, I wouldn't do that. That's horrible. I say, well, the doctor said you have a potentially fatal disease, so let's poison your body and see how it does. It's insane. When you think of it like that, it's completely crazy.
No, I know, and I love it when other people say it.
Yeah,
it's just always coming from me.
Right. It's just you've got to be kidding me. I mean, there's no other way. I mean, that's insane. And an interesting thing is that people around you, it's all because of fear. That they've done such a good job of conditioning people that either you have to cut you, burn you, or poison you, or it's not going to work. And
right.
But that's their business. They're business people, and they went to business school, which was also called medical school, and learned how to run a business, which is keep them coming back for more drugs because you can buy nicer Porsches that way.
Yeah, I'd like to bring Am in for a moment here because this is a story that we resonate with a lot because you're oftentimes seeing patients that will have in their mind one way of doing something, and we're gently, you don't want to push. You want to be able to provide openings for people, but you can gently offer this information. But it doesn't resonate with them until they're ready. When we come back, I'd like to bring Am in on this and focus a little bit on solution-related healing in this way.
Absolutely. And hey, Dean, if you want to pick up the uptake on the other side of the commercials, you're welcome to, because I don't want to take any time away from this broadcast. So, yes, yay, nay.
Okay.
Welcome back, listeners. This is Evolving the Species. It's a twice-a-month program that we offer you on Uncommon Awareness. I have two hosts that join me on these two Fridays, Dean Lloyd and Am Rosen. And if you missed the first part of the broadcast, please pick up the archive. But in the interest of time, because there's so much to talk about, we're going to turn it right over to Dr. Dean Lloyd.
Thank you, Lorraine. And I was just going to turn it right back over to Am. I was asking at the end of the last segment. It was focusing on Leon's story and how we so very often come across people that are in that position of making a decision on what to do with things like cancer, and they're in their mindset is programmed fear. You go to what you're afraid of. So I wanted Am's input on this to elaborate on creating the scene and solution.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, we all walk around thinking such highfalutin, high-toned thoughts, but then maybe we scratch ourselves when we breathe, and we go, oh, my God, I'm mortal. In other words, we're talking about the vulnerability of the body. And it's funny, the first thing we're given when we come into this world is our body. And the last thing we will leave behind is our body. And if you look at it, if we're married to anything first, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, for better or worse, and I do wish everybody all the superlatives, it's our body. It's our energy strata vehicle. It allows us to experience this level of existence. Or if we don't take properly care of it, I always say the beast needs a good master, then it becomes our ball and chain and prison. Now, barring accidental injury or assault, and assault can be environmental, unfortunately these days it too often is, there are only two ways we imbalance the body. The body is genetically programmed to self-repair for maintenance. Either we don't give it enough of what it needs to adequately perform its tasks, and it strains and imbalances itself trying to keep up with the demands of our will, or we put a poor quality of fuel in it, which gums it up. So the cardinal rule for maintaining metabolic health is input-output. If we're going to burn up the energy physically, emotionally, mentally, then we need to replace it. If not, we inadvertently borrow from one tissue section, one organ or gland system to feed the demands of another, which eventually will lead to a shutdown. Now, we've got trillions of cells in our body in a continuous state of cell replication. The cells you had when you were born are not the cells that are in your body now. These cells have to continuously multiply in a biological terrain. If that terrain is insufficient in terms of adequate nutrition, which would lower its performance capability, or if there's toxic buildup, which is a blockage, which means a diminishment of nutrient factors that you need, a diminishment of oxygen that's, and we'll get into that, for necessary for combustion in the cellular structure itself, then you're going to get degeneration. These cells, which have to replicate, are replicating in an inferior environment. This leads to aberrations, mutagenicity in the cells, where they replicate, but they don't replicate the way they're supposed to. But once a cell, which is a biological organism, comes into existence, it has only one directive, genetically, totally unconsciously, which is to replicate itself. If it's now come into existence as a mismatch to the cellular integrity of what the body needs to maintain its functioning, then it starts to fight the other cells because it wants to exist. And that's basically what we're calling cancer. Now, when someone comes to me and they've been diagnosed with this, my first question is, where in the body has this mutagenicity taken hold? And why is that particular part of the body the part that's susceptible? And, of course, there's a lot of factors that go into that, both physical and emotional. So if you have our cells are basically biomachines. They have to process energy. Now, all biological machines, just as well as mechanical machines, need energy, and in the process of using that energy, there's a combustion factor, and they give off waste. At least we hope they do. If not, then you stew in your own juices. That combustion factor needs and requires oxygen. It's very interesting that wherever there's a diminishment of cellular activity in the body, you'll find a lack of oxygen, especially once you get a cancerous mutagenesis in the body. Now,
yeah, and we've kind of called that bioterrain on the show, and I don't know if that's the concept you work with, but we do have to take a break, listeners. We'll be right back in just a few moments to continue this really fascinating conversation. Okay, we're returning to our program following that commercial break, and Dr. Am Rosen was interrupted and was really kind of giving us a great foundation, a great groundwork for what we're talking about with what's going on. So, Am, I just want you to fly.
Thank you. Yes, it's an intrinsic part of my nature. All right. So we have somebody that has exhibited this mutagenic quality in the cells, where the health of the cell is now reproducing in a way that's not compatible with the other cells in the body. As I was saying, why is this? Is it in the stomach? Is it in the skin? Is it it in the bone? Is it in a particular organ? Why is this particular part of the body the part that's susceptible? Well, obviously the immune system has been overloaded for a while. What would overload the immune system? Well, continued toxic buildup in the body in various tissues puts the immune system in a state of alarm. But the other thing that can overload the immune system is what we call stress. Now, there are two basic qualities of stress. The first is the physical stress, which simply means you don't have enough energy to match your output. If you've got the physical vitality to keep up with the demands, then you're busy. But when you don't have the physical vitality, the body isn't metabolically whole, it's not performing the way it should, and you need to get the job done, then you start to will yourself to perform. And that's when it becomes stressful. Your body becomes weaker and slacker, being exhausted by the performance you're demanding of it, and the mind winds up becoming tighter and tighter, trying to force the body. So you have the mind and body going in two different directions. Now, the other part of stress is emotional, okay? And as has been mentioned, fear is a big component of that. And we've talked about fear in some of our other broadcasts. All fear, I don't care what you're afraid of or what you think it is or what caused it, all fear is basically a defended misunderstanding. You have come up with a perspective, either mentally by intellectual design, or you have a subconscious pattern you've been given, that this is the way things are supposed to be, this is how you should respond to them. And you don't know that, but in defending that, you've tightened yourself up, you've become armored, desensitized, of course, and that's putting a strain on the body. Because whatever you do to the body affects the mind through the emotional processes. Whatever you come up with mentally creates an emotional component into the body. And it's very important to understand this. As I said, we think all kinds of thoughts. Wow, love, truth, life, God, divinity, whatever. But we don't often feel that way. And our feelings have, for most people, and it's time to end this, remain dominant and subconscious and highly irrational. A lot of what we feel often goes against our reason, our desire, and our better judgment. But that sends messages to the body. It doesn't matter what you think or what you avoid thinking about. It doesn't matter how many people you can convince of your sincerity. If you are uptight, in other words, if there's a blockage in the psyche, that is going to always it's going to register on the metabolic organs. And as I said, which organs are involved? Which tissue systems are involved? That's a key note. Now, much more to chat about, but come on, guys, jump in, please.
That's a good place to bring Leon back, because when he was going through the decision, he mentioned that he was having all of his previous understanding of what cancer was. And when we are talking about cancer, it's a word that's used a lot, but when you define it, it does come down to a cell that doesn't know how to die. It comes down to an anaerobic environment. In fact, in the 50s, there was the Pulitzer Peace Prize-winning research of Dr. Warburg that came up with the findings that cancer cannot live in an oxygen environment. That means an aerobic environment. And what Am is talking about is, why are you predisposed to get cancer in the first place? Is there physical issues? Is there emotional? It's very often both. But what we're finding out, and we've been using techniques that have been able to boost the immune system, but what we're finding out is so much of this has to do with the will and the decision-making on the part of the person who's going into the treatments, that they are going to put in their first priority not just the cancer, but becoming well. And that's what I wanted to bring in Leon on the second half of his story, is that's what his state of mind was, is he wanted to overcome the ill effects of the chemotherapy. Is that not right?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. And when I was first diagnosed with leukemia. I started doing research on it because it was kind of a rare form of leukemia, and I found out that it was actually the same leukemia that the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had because they were exposed to radiation, and the people in Chernobyl. And when I was 11 years old, I was in a private school, and I had a teacher who caused me a lot of mental and emotional stress, and I broke out with psoriasis. So they radiated me for 2 years. And so actually it was Western medicine that gave me what they then called leukemia, which was actually radiation poisoning. So it was surely my body had been toxic. After those radiation treatments as a kid, I would get colds all the time because it had really compromised my immune system. And then, of course, they started putting me on steroid drugs and chemo drugs for psoriasis as well. So by the time this most recent round started 9 months ago, where I really started getting into intensive treatments, I was trying to get all the toxins out of my body that had been introduced to cure the things that the toxins had caused.
Yes.
And, in the way that the Western medicine doctors looked at it, I was in a spiral. I was stuck in a circle because they were just going to give me more drugs to combat the effects of the drugs they had given me. And so my frame of mind was I'm going to really just cleanse my body to give my body the opportunity to do what it knows how to do, to really get my whole human functions and supported emotionally and mentally and spiritually so that everything is flowing. And very interesting result of the experience of doing that, because it took everything I had. It took 100% of my attention and my will, my courage, and tested it. And it's the most worthwhile thing I've ever done.
I'm going to rarely interject. I want to really focus on what you just said. Working through mainstream medicine and then working my way into functional medicine and working my way into energy medicine, what I've learned is that the people that heal are the ones who are willing to make it absolutely the priority of their life to live. And that's what you're describing.
Yes.
Yeah, and
I'm glad you
I want to throw that out there because I don't want people to think that they can go plug into a device or they can go online somewhere or they can find, in other words, there's something going on with alternative medicine right now kind of called, we'll just fix it for you. A lot like mainstream medicine. Oh, my gosh. Very distressing for me.
Well, Lorraine, people are conditioned to want that because if you have a headache, you take Tylenol or whatever, and so you want that quick result. I mean, we've been conditioned to think that that's how medicine works, and that right. It's only been that way for a few decades. If you look back into all the ancient methods of healing, they take a long time, and it also there was a kind of a community participation. The people in your tribe would work on it with you. And
well, right. Your mother wouldn't turn you out the door and say, go do your chemotherapy, see when you get home, and make sure you do your homework.
Well, if you're doing chemo, no one can really help you. When I was doing chemo, I had to be put into isolation because my immune system was so compromised. They didn't even want my dog around me because they were afraid if the dog scratched me that I'd die of an infection. And I mean, how healing is that? In this most recent episode of my healing that I'm still involved in, the community where I live turned out and supported me in such amazing ways. It was really a big part of the holistic treatment of the whole part, to have that support and those people there. It turned out later that some of them didn't believe that I was going to get well doing it holistically and are now blown away.
Yeah.
But I certainly didn't know that at the time.
And let me elaborate a little bit on that, please. What he's referring to is there were a number of different things that took place, but one of them was a fundraising concert that he held, and the community all turned out to hear him play his music.
It wasn't me playing; it was all my friends that played.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it was your music, and that they would, in other words, that piece of community that in Western medicine we're very good at separating things.
Dean, I understand what you're trying to say. Someone was sick. His life work had produced something that people should honor and love, and there are people willing to honor and love that, and they put it out. So he may not have been a musician. This is really important information. What happens and I'm going to kind of bring it back to an MD stated thing, is do you know that in my world, when people get sick, I'm not living in California or Boulder or anything else like that, everyone says, ignore the alternative. It's good for, making your skin look great. It's good for removing the pain from your joints. When you get cancer, you run to the doctors. And so if you're somebody who says, this is the last time you want to run to the doctors, there's an entire social kind of construct around be afraid, be very afraid, be very, very afraid, and then die. And how do we interact with people who are afraid and very afraid, or very, very afraid, and then die?
I was so sensitive to that, Lorraine, that when I was re-diagnosed, I didn't tell anyone that I had been told that for 4 years.
Okay, well, we have to take a commercial break, and I keep stealing Dean's hosting. I'm sorry, because your story is so phenomenal. We'll be right back. Okay, listeners, we are back on Uncommon Awareness. And you know what? I actually invite people on this program that know more than I do, and then I forget that they know more than I do, and I kind of interject. And, I really just want to turn this over to Dean again and say I'm sorry to inflect, because I know you have several things we have to describe for people.
Well, and Lorraine, please don't apologize. I'm very happy that you did jump in. This is just adding the spice to what we're talking about, because it makes it more relative and it puts it in focus for people. Because when they are all alone, they're isolating themselves in conditions like what Leon had. He had his community answered, even though they may not have understood what he was doing. Leon put forth, and part of healing, this is it. Healing takes the conscious effort, but it also takes the courage to make these changes possible. And I was going to head into Am's direction here in a minute, but what you brought up, Lorraine, is such a valid thing that we don't talk about in medicine, because what the community is so very often, like Leon was saying, indoctrinated to be afraid and be very afraid. You were saying, Leon.
No, and that's maybe where I have some contribution to this conversation, is that I really want listeners to understand we do not have any comprehension for how brainwashed or, I need to be kind of careful with time and so forth. Listen to what this man is saying. Listen to his personal choice to be personally responsible for whatever happened in his life. This is the portal to healing. There's no way you're going to assign responsibility for healing to any institution or any other person in your life.
Lorraine, I often tell people that and I want to address what you said about people saying when you're diagnosed with cancer, be very afraid, and there's only one way to go. You have to go to the doctor. There's no other way. Because I was so sensitive to that, I didn't want to tell anyone that I'd been re-diagnosed, because everyone gets really afraid. Mm-hmm. And people would call me crying and very upset, and it seemed like they were almost more upset than I was, But when I was I've been an athlete my entire life, a competitive athlete, and in an extreme skiing accident some years ago, I broke off my arm, basically.
Dean told me a little bit about this. Please do tell. Yeah,
well, it was hanging 5 inches out of the socket, and if there hadn't been an orthopedic surgeon that could screw it back together, I wouldn't be using my right arm, and I really like my right arm. It works really well. And but so I was really happy that there was a guy that could screw me back together, and make everything function. And so there's room for both. But there's things that the Western doctors do that is amazing. But I don't think so in the treatment of cancer that that you can look at them as the only option, because my personal experience with chemo was it took me the opposite direction. I've heard myself say many times the chemo made me sicker than the disease.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. We can sometimes hear that the treatment is worse than the disease itself, but sort of relying on just one option is very often the case when cancer is given. You've got radiation and chemotherapy; those are your choices. Just to show you an opposite or show some comparison, in Germany. And this is the therapy that Leon had been doing. In Germany, it is commonplace for people that have conditions that are eczema and cancer and degenerative diseases, bacterial infections, viruses. And this is treated with this oxygen therapy that he took on. And we're going to talk all about that and bring Am in on this, too, when we come back.
So let's do bring it back, because I traveled to Germany. They actually have cities devoted to healing. They're Western. Okay, listeners, you're hearing an awful lot that may or may not be familiar to you. Absorb the fact that you've got so many people here today that are really wanting you to understand how healing and cure is possible. See you very, very soon. Okay, listeners, we are moving on to the second hour of Uncommon Awareness today. You are listening to our Evolving the Species forum. This is the second and fourth Friday of every month. We do something that's a little bit different than me hosting. We bring on host Dean Lloyd and host Am Rosen and guests. And today we are so privileged to have with us Leon Littlebird, who's talking to us about how he actually cured from cancer without traditional therapy. He went that way once. He'll never go that way again. And he's a musician. He's, he's in service to others throughout all of his life. So I don't want to take up more time. Dean, go ahead.
Okay, that's beautiful. With Leon's story, I wanted to tell the listeners here that didn't get a chance to hear the first hour that he had gone through chemotherapy for leukemia, and it made him so sick, and the leukemia did come back, that he said, no more. I'm going to do this a different way. I'm going to do this, but I'm going to understand what's happening with me while I'm doing it. And I came into the picture, and he was doing some oxygen therapy prior to me treating him. And when he did meet me, he needed to up the ante, so to speak, or go to the next level. So what I wanted to tell the audience, or provide the audience, is the opportunity to see what this particular modality or what oxygen therapy offers. And in order to create the atmosphere, I think what I should first say is that oxygen and / energized oxygen, which is also known as ozone therapy, I should offer some sanity, or make sense, if you will, on how this simple gas should be used in every hospital, outpatient clinic, and in Leon's case, for cancer patients as an option.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt, and I really do this very discretionarily. There are multiple studies, so I just want listeners to know. We're not going to take Dean's time.
No, please.
Don't take his word. I'm going to tell you, Google oxygen therapy and healing, period. Go ahead, Dean. Great.
And sort of to illustrate this, there was there's a great video. I hope it's somehow becomes available again, but it was called Ozone and the Politics of Medicine. and it became unavailable very soon after it was released. But Dr. Horace Keefe was the first German patient used patients that were coming to him for AIDS back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. And he was treating them with ozone, and they were living, these are terminal patients that had AIDS, and they were living normal lives. And I wanted to just, remind people that, when we're talking about oxygen therapy, we're not talking about just, putting up an oxygen tank, and sticking the tubes up your nose, which is, necessary in some cases. But we're talking about active oxygen here. And you've got the complete opposite where Dr. David Bates in Canada says it's lunatic medicine. So be prepared for that kind of response also.
Oh, and Steve Barrett of Quackbusters. Sorry, Dean.
No.
Interject.
No, that's
that
great.
man is the most malevolent, awful person I've ever encountered in my life.
And they've got an agenda. They're coming from a place where it's all about them, and as long as they're, knocking down these incredible therapies, they're going to keep the public in the dark, and they somehow have power over them, which is not where we're coming from. We're coming from a place of empowering the patient because we're empowered ourselves, and we make that statement. But you can challenge us on this. But in order for us to be able to provide this information, we have had to have gone through this to know it works. So in staying with just the oxygen therapies and its benefit, just know that this therapy can be administered a variety of different ways. And we're bringing Leon, his case, into focus here so that it can be related in his particular treatment. But we do.
Well, and also not just to relate to Leon, the name, but when you go to his website, Leon the person, so alive, so involved, so wonderful, so contributing. And when people begin to realize that cancer is taking this kind of life force from us, I hope that they'll pay more attention to what we're talking about.
Yeah, and we should all, and you brought up the point that we were talking about in the first hour, that healing should be, as as a tribe, that healing everybody participated in what they had to offer because they wanted this person to heal, and there was love there. How often do we bring that into the equation of chemotherapy? It's not even there. Ever. And so what we are talking...
Well, the love, unfortunately, gets masked by the fear.
Right.
When I see, like, breast cancer walks and stuff, I'm all for it. It's amazing. But there's this overwhelming sensitivity that there's a fear that's driving those people to participate.
Well, Leon, perhaps you have advice for my 15-year-old daughter who is going to spend 12 hours this weekend walking for breast cancer. Her teacher had breast cancer, did the mastectomy, and I say to my daughter, oh, I'm so glad, doctor, I'm so glad Lisa's free of cancer, but, I'm just kind of getting to this place in life where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to talk to people anymore.
Yeah. Well, here, if I can interject something here, that I felt from having this experience of being here on the radio with three really incredibly knowledgeable doctors and knowing what you're doing, I wanted to share something for the listeners of my experience that as advice from one patient to another. When I started, and I think this is one of the things that can help demystify holistic treatment and getting started. If you're out there listening and you've been diagnosed and you're wondering what you should do next, and you know some people that are, per se, healers. I got started with people who really knew what they were doing, really helped me, really got me on the right path, really helped me get rolling. But at some point, I knew I needed more, and that's when my friend Dr. Dean Lloyd came in, to the forefront. And I started working with someone who's actually a doctor who understood these modalities, and it was the turning point for me without question, because he took a more holistic approach to everything I was doing, and I got better advice. It was clear. He put me on a better regimen. and really gave me everything I needed to support the healing completely. So a lot of holistic ideas, or the mindset of the general public, is that holistic is kind of smoke and mirrors, kind of almost a voodoo, and there's practitioners out there that can do things, but there's also these wonderful holistic doctors. Almost every community has them, that it seems to me. But find someone like that you resonate with and can work with, and have them demystify all this for you.
Perfect time for website addresses and email addresses. Gentlemen, please do it. I am completely in alignment with, you need to work with these men. Let's just speak it out. What are the website addresses? What are the contact addresses?
Okay. I'll bring Am right in here, but I'll just speak first, and it's www.accutone.com. My contact information is there, and the radio shows that both Am and I host on Wolf Spirit with the State of Mind Quality of Life show, and also
excellent radio show, by the way, listeners. Excellent.
Thank you. And you can contact me if you go to that website. You'll see my contact info. And Am, please give us your contact info.
Lifegame.com.
You'll find a whole variety of things in there. Some excerpts from some of my books, samples, some podcasts. You'll find the process that I've developed that I'm anxious to get into the hands of other professionals. You'll find the Geigers, which are an outline of them, a 100% psychological foolproof way of gauging your inner state of mind. Can I jump in? I've been listening. Just a few thoughts occurred to me.
Please.
You can, Am. We're probably going to be cut short by a commercial soon, but please start.
All right. Well, first off, we're talking about fear. And as I said, all fear, whether it's you don't know where it's coming from, you just feel anxious, or it's full-blown hysteria, you can't get out of the way of it. Comes from not understanding and thinking or feeling you do. But if you take fear all the way out, we talk about putting the fear of God into you. Now, if you think about that as an archetypal absurdity, the fear of God would be the devil. And once they get that soul sucker into you, you'll do just about anything they say to supposedly get rid of them. Fear. We all feel vulnerable because we're all mortal. So we're looking for a panacea, and there ain't no such thing. The body is a biological construct. It never breaks down for no reason. It's just that for most people, those reasons are obscured, which brings us to these various traditions or various approaches to dealing with the body's malfunctions. And a lot of what we call Western medicine, in order for medicine to come online, to science to establish itself from the hysteria of the Dark Ages, when the Renaissance, the Age of Reason hit, there was a forced separation of mind and body. Okay, this is what you're telling yourself. You believe this is superstition, and a lot of it was. So, but we have a method, the scientific method of observation, hypothetical conjecture, and we can test these things out. And we really want the best that science and technology can offer. But the art of health, which is seldom practiced, involves individual application. You're not adjusting people to some insurance statistic or some pharmaceutical statistic. You're adjusting them to the comfort level of their own dynamic, their own metabolic vitality, which furthers the mental capacity. And this is in practice. Western medicine has come down to emergency medicine. Now, if you have an emergency, that requires that you make exceptions and allowances, and that's necessary. But we don't want to live our lives like it is an emergency. That proves to be destructive. And so what you have
I just had a thought.
Excuse me?
Am is really walking us through kind of how things are structured. maybe as we introduce this next segment, I will structure things in a way that you can actually understand and take part of EM. An amazing man with amazing resources and information. Not to denigrate Leon. All right, we're back. We are going to be winding down this series of Uncommon Awareness very soon, but Am Rosen was making some statements and some comments that I think are really important for us to listen to. And, Am, do you want to just continue? I'll pick up my question.
Well, I'll say a few more things, then we can kick it around some more. But, all right, most of us, when we're afraid, fear makes you shut down. It makes you contract and constrict yourself. I like to tell people you can't serve two masters. You can't serve both fear and understanding. You have to ask yourself, who am I serving? Who's my master? Do you serve your fears or do you serve your understanding? You're never afraid when you understand. You're potentially afraid of anything you don't understand that you defend. Now, when we feel vulnerable and we're sick, all of a sudden the party isn't happening and we feel pain or weakness, who do we turn to? The authority figure. Western medicine evolved as let's shut down the symptoms. You know, something's manifesting, it has to be combative. It's combative medicine. And as I said, there are times you absolutely need it. You've got to stop the flow. You've got to, as Leon pointed out, put the shoulder back in place. Very necessary. But this is not an approach to health. We need to integrate the mind and body, both individually and socially, as Leon also pointed out. So when you have it, if you've diagnosed with something, and I've dealt with a lot of this over the decades, then the first thing is, where is it occurring in the body? Why is that particular organ or tissue part of the body susceptible? What needs to be eliminated? What needs to be strengthened? It's not a linear equation. If you just dump in things, drugs that suppress the symptoms, well, you're not getting rid of what caused the symptoms or the susceptibility in the first place. All you can do is maintain a battle, but because all drugs do not cure. They can be extremely helpful if used the right way, but they always have secondary effects. They always take something out of the body. They always tax the liver, which has to process them. So if a drug is necessary for a short amount of time, then you need to fortify the body so it can handle those processes, and you need to also facilitate the body's elimination of toxic buildup and repair of the tissue. If not, you're stuck in diminishing returns, which is what too many people often experience these days.
Great that you put that in focus for us, because so clear to us when we're referring to, drug detoxification or, the use of these medications. People, when they're coming to us for building their immune system and they're already in a weakened immune state, compromised place, you can't just simply replace the natural remedy with the drug with the natural remedy in all cases. And in fact, what Leon is bringing up is that he knew what was going on with him, what the drug side effects were, and he would never go back to that. And as a result, he saw...
Dean?
Yes?
He knew at some point. He didn't know when he engaged. And I'm sorry, I just think it's a really important thing to bring up to listeners is, and then you don't, and then you don't know or you do know or whatever. Experience is really helpful.
Okay, good punchline. But it's true, and that was the change of his. He was consciously taking charge, and that's what our job is to put people in that position. But we have to overcome what is not understanding about what is causing these things. In the case of a weakened immune system, if we're not appropriately identifying with why our body's not eliminating these toxins, for example, it was appropriate for me to introduce the oxygen therapy for his case because he was not detoxifying effectively enough. And when we bring in the oxygen therapies, it's the most important. I would put it at the top of the list for him because everything you eliminate in the form of a toxin has to be combined with an oxygen atom. Carbon dioxide, it's what you exhale. When you sweat it out, when you breathe it out, whatever comes out of you in waste, everything that comes out of you has to be connected to oxygen. You can't survive after 3 minutes of it. So when we come back, we're going to round it all up, but I wanted to make sure we're clear on this piece.
And you are doing so great at taking over this show. Go ahead, Guy. I love you. Okay, we're winding down the program today of Uncommon Awareness. You have been listening to Evolving the Species, and let's let Dr. Dean Lloyd kind of wrap up what he's been really working hard to help us understand. It's great information. You have to listen. You have to be willing to take part. Dr. Dean?
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Okay, so Em was pointing out that, being an appropriate way of addressing in your condition situation, it needs a conscious progression. And what I am pointing out with this unique case is that in ozonating or providing oxygen, flooding his whole body with so much oxygen that his body had to detoxify, it provided him an opening to overcome. And this propelled his immune system to take over for itself, where the chemotherapy had suppressed it to the point to where he couldn't overcome leukemia or the disease. This provided him the launch that allowed all those viruses, any bacteria that was present that had been behind the leukemia, these were neutralized. And when we're doing oxygen therapies, there's a lot available to us, and if you're interested in finding out more, you can contact me personally. But I just wanted to remind the audience, if they don't know already, that over 2,000 cities are using this as a disinfectant and ozone therapies to disinfect any viruses, any bacteria in the water. It deodorizes it and so on. Well, that's what it's doing in your body, if you think of it in such broad terms. But so much of ozone has been, focusing on these negative effects of breathing. So most MDs don't even know there's any application at all whatsoever that it can be used in this way. So, again, when you're talking about detoxification, Am, I want to bring you in here in a second. When you're talking about detoxification, I'm making a big plug here for oxygen therapies as being in the front, absolutely required for big cases. The little cases too, but very important for the big disorders. And Am, could you round that up?
Well, as I was saying in the beginning, all the cellular processes in your body, in order to function, there's a utilization of energy, biochemical energy, and an elimination of waste product that is given off. That requires oxidative combustion. In other words, oxygen is necessary for the cells. That's why the part of the job of the blood cells is to take oxygen in to the tissues, nutrients and oxygen, and eliminate toxic buildup. But toxic, we're talking about toxins. Toxic means it's something that's detrimental to your body. There's a biological constant that no organism can survive in an environment of its own waste. So when you have a toxic buildup, which is caused by blockage and inadequacy of metabolic support, you need to eliminate this because you're poisoning yourself. So oxygen can be a very necessary and wonderful assistance. I wholeheartedly agree with that. As I said, you'll never find, wherever there's cancer in the body, you'll find a diminishment, if not a blockage, of oxygen to the tissues involved in that. That's one aspect. Why did the blockage occur? What wasn't the body getting? Where was it overstressed? Now, you have to bring in the mental factor. And I've mentioned a little bit about feelings. Feelings being, for most people, subconscious. Feelings are simply how you respond to stimulus. Those feelings are locked in from the unconscious level, from various gradients of the subconscious level, which are totally irrational. Oftentimes what we feel doesn't make sense, but we go, yeah, I can't help it. That's just the way I feel about things. And then we have mental constructs. We form emotional patterns with the feelings. So you have this mishmash of feelings going, which quite often are turned against us. Fear, doubt, confusion, anxiety, guilt, and shame are primitive response patterns. All they show you is that you don't really understand how to deal with something. But once they're locked in, they have a very detrimental effect on the body. The good news is, and this is very attainable, this is not whimsical or mumbo-jumbo. The good news is that once you gain control of those response patterns and you start to liberate them and redirect them, they can be as beneficial in facilitating the body's functions as they are detrimental when they're irrationally turned against you. And that's a big part of what happened. For what Leon describes, the community is very important to him. And it gave him a sense of support that most people are lacking in our modern, somewhat over-mentalized society right now. We need to touch. We need to feel that we are cared about and supported. Most people are very afraid, and as I said, that blocks energy, shuts you down, and constricts you. You want to open to life. You want to let it in. And, of course, we could go on and on talking about protocols, nutrient protocols, energy protocols, exercise protocols, which are very important, but that's an educational process for the public. But what we wanted you to know is that there are alternatives and that the body can be changed and that you don't be very suspicious with negative emotions. They're just misunderstandings that you've defended. Dean?
And Lorraine, I know that you're resonating to this piece, but I wanted to just get a little bit, hearing Leon's case, as for us as practitioners, we're given so much opposition. And when we hear how, when we know what we know is right, and we consider, all these different ways of treating people, but we're supported by people like Leon because not only did he take on the challenge, but he's showing us, coming back to us, there's an energy that comes back to us in a healing for ourselves as we see that happening, as the healing takes place in our patients. Can you relate to that?
I can, and I'll tell you what, I kind of sit back and go a little bit like, because everything seems to be always responding to everything that's revealed. So,
yeah, you're taking it all in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leon, did you have something you picked up on from that?
Very much so. I've had people who are quizzing me now. They're really curious. They want to know how I did this. How did you heal yourself of leukemia? How did this happen? And somebody asked me a couple months ago, what was the number one most important thing you did? They were looking for that panacea that you talked about earlier. But that what's the one thing? If there was one thing, and my immediate, spontaneous, and open response was, it's when I started loving myself unconditionally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Really reach a point where you can say, all right, I'm going to do this in a loving way. What's the most loving thing I can do for my body? Well, it's not poison it. It's not respond to fear. It's not cave in to beliefs that aren't true. I'm really going to love my body. I'm going to do stuff healthy and healing. And now, if I had done the traditional Western medicine chemotherapy route, my immune system would be trashed, I'd be poisoned, I'd be recovering from a lack of energy and being poisoned, and I'd be in debt. And instead, I'm really healthy and getting stronger and have a new way of life that is even more vital than my life was before.
Yeah, we have a saying, Leon, and the greater the illness, the greater the transformation.
Well, my transformation has been so incredibly beautiful that it has inspired me to take my life and my journey and my music and energy into even more places and to help more people and bring healing to as many people as possible. Last night, I was contacted by some people who want to do a documentary on what we're talking about on my life and healing journey. And I just want to inspire anyone that's listening to really look at yourself and say, what's the most loving thing I can do for myself in this journey? What am I responding to fear and anxiety and a helplessness, or am I giving myself the opportunity to fully love myself and transform into something even greater than I've ever imagined?
Yeah, and Am, could you just give a little?
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Leon. It's a process of unfolding. I like to define love as metagravity. It's that which draws you from whatever level you're operating from, however you're oriented, to the next more expansive, inclusive, and integrated level of functioning. It's the fulfillment of human potential, which we're all conveyors for. So it's one thing to know what you don't want. You don't want to give into the negative, but that can also keep you focused because you have to stay with the negative to have something to get away from. The thing is, where are you going? You're either going to where you want to go, again, towards a more expansive, inclusive, integrated level of awareness, or you're getting rid of what's in the way of that. So nothing is negative. Everything that bothers you is an opportunity for liberation through greater understanding and integration of those circuitries. It becomes an adventure. You stop fighting the negative and you start moving towards a more positive, expansive space.
Right. And what it's so clear. Okay, when you wake up and there's something to that gives you energy instead of I dread to wake up or I don't have something to move into. We talked about before, the Dylan song. I don't know verbatim the words, but if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. And so what I'm hearing from Leon is that when he saw that this opportunity opened up for him, it wasn't, as you mentioned before, the diminishing returns. Then his choice was made individually, that this was not something that his community decided for him. And all healing, everything that takes place, is that act of coming and being conscious. And that's what we wanted to provide the listeners with. And in our closing statements, I think we've covered a lot these last 2 hours. Thank you, Lorraine.
We did. We just finished off our last lengthy segment. We've got a few more minutes. We'll be right back. Winding down this day's program of Uncommon Awareness, we've really had an exceptional opportunity evolving the species with Dr. Dean Lloyd, Am Rosen, and Leon Littlebird. Let's just kind of let Dean take us out.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine. A couple points that I'd like to focus on with Am's point about realizing your unique position and where you want to head with healing. When you hear Leon's story, what oftentimes comes up is fear. And where am I going to turn to next? Am I going to the authority figure? And that very often can be detrimental. But what we are reminding people is that when you become the educated and the one that desires that information, you you have to discern what is really appropriate here. And it takes the effort to do that. In Leon's case, and I'm going to ask him here to make sure that I'm right on this, he didn't just jump into the holistic practices right away. He wanted to know what was going on with him. And am I right with that?
It is.
It is. Okay. And what I was, and very often is the case where we're having this opposition going on here, where the doctors are not listening to their patients. They're dictating what takes place. And the patients are saying, well, what about this therapy and what about that therapy? And the doctors cannot intelligently comment on how to proceed because they don't see it as being available. It's not accessible. So we're in a very unique time in the healing arts. I'm not talking just medicine. I'm talking the healing arts, that we have an opening. And this is the opportunity to have the individual, the person who needs the healing, which we all do, is to seek out our resources in a way where we're not just clumping them in the old way or the old pattern. So if there is something that's more appropriate, like in the case of treating cancer, seek out the way that the Germans have been doing this. Why is it more effective and appropriate for their situation? And that's what either Am or myself, or there's other, I can refer people to a network of different doctors that are doing this kind of therapy and oxygen therapy, that if they're interested in pursuing this particular way of healing. But what we're really talking, on the deepest level, is the consciousness shift that takes place when we are in healing and what we're confronted with. And Am, I just wanted to get your little comment on what I'm mentioning in this.
Well, yes. It's the will to live. And nobody can help you, can get you what you need, can show you how to apply it, but can't do it for you. Nobody can breathe for you. Nobody can swallow the water for you, even if they can help you get to a better source of it. So the will to live, exercising our will is how we focus. We intend things to be. We focus our consciousness. And will requires two things from the self-conscious, the mental level. It requires reason and purpose. The better your reasons, the clearer your purpose, the better you can focus your will. So as I said, you need to become very suspicious of negative emotions. They're only misunderstandings. Don't fight them. Don't run away from them. Don't suppress them. Don't alibi for them. What am I thinking? Why am I responding this way, feeling this way? Where did this come from? Where did I get these values, these standards? How adequate are they on a scale of 1 to 10? Pretty good? Or totally off the charts, and they're dragging me to the pits? It's a question of all healing is a process of becoming self-conscious. When you're aware, whether we're dealing with the cellular tissues of the body and the biochemical processes they engender, or whether we're dealing with the various levels of mental perception, the more conscious you are, the more access you have, the more understanding you gain through experience, the more control you can exercise.
Okay, thank you all. I'll look forward to our next Evolving the Species. Thank you, Leon. You did wonderful.
Thank you.
I can't wait till we get out there and tell more stories.
Beautiful.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you, Am.
I'm more than happy to tell more stories. Yeah, so thank you, Dean and Am. Are we done? I think we are.